Hey guys, it's Courtney. I'm here with part one of 5 cards, one kit using the January 2019 Simon Says Stamp Card Kit. So we're going to jump right into the first card, and I'm going to be using one of these little penguins. And the penguin that I'm using, there's two in the set. One is pretty large, one is the one I'm using, and this one's on little ice skates. So I wanted to create a little, very simple scene with 3 of these little penguins holding hands ice skating. So I'm using my Misty because some of this image is solid. I wanted to make sure that I could stamp this twice to make sure that I kept that solid, bold black outline of the image. So I'm using Blackout ink by Ink on 3, and this is Copic safe because I am just going to be doing just a little bit of shading, and I'm going to be using some Copics in the background as well. So I'm just kind of arranging my images here to make sure that it appears somewhat like they're holding hands or holding fins, I guess they are. Um, and I'm stamping each one of these images twice. Now you'll see when I'm cleaning off my stamp each time, but the stamp may have been a little bit damp from my stamp chamois, so I didn't get a great impression with this third one, and I'll just fix that with my black Copic marker later. I'm not really too concerned about it. Once all of my stamping was done, we're going to do just a little bit of ink blending for the sky. So I'm taking a piece of Post-it note tape and just masking out the bottom portion of the card, and then realized that it really wasn't going to mask it out enough. I was too worried that my ink blending tool was going to go beyond that tape. So I just took a scrap piece of Eclipse masking paper that I kind of just had sitting on my desk and placed that on the bottom portion of the card just to protect that as well. Going to be using Tumbled Sky Distress Oxide ink, and I'm going to be doing a light coat of this because I wanted my sky to be fairly light. I'm not using any other colors. I'm just using this, and I'm starting right on my mask and then working my way up towards the top of the card panel, kind of fading out to almost white. So the darkest area of the sky will be right along that mask. And then I'll go ahead and remove that mask and we'll start with the Copic coloring. Now, like I said, most of these penguins here are already black, so you don't have to do much shading. You don't even have to do any shading. But I did add a little bit of shading off to the left-hand side and the bottom of the penguins with my C3 and my C1. Starting with the C3, just adding a few little flicks to the left side and the bottom, and just a little bit of a line underneath their little beak to add a shadow there. Flicking that out with the C1, and then I'll quickly go over that in the opposite direction of my flicks with my colorless blender just to kind of get rid of that texture that I had created with those flick lines. Now for their little beaks there, I am using some YR markers naturally. And these are tiny too. You don't necessarily need to do a whole lot of shading here, but I did just add a little bit of shading to the bottom part of their little beaks, blended that out with the mid-tone and then back to that lightest color. Now for the ice, I'm just doing I'm barely touching the marker here. Sometimes I'm totally missing the paper. I'm touching it so lightly to the paper, and I'm just doing little lines, I guess, just to kind of add some texture with some BG markers, using the darkest BG marker towards the back of the ice. So the further back it is, the darker it would appear. And then I decided to add some shading on either side as well. So I'm just kind of putting a base coat down with my lightest color to get the paper saturated a little bit. Then I'll bring back that B18 and just start flicking in from either side. This isn't even necessary. It just was too plain for me because it's such a big area. I was having a hard time blending those out, so I brought in my BG15, blended that out, blended the BG18 out, and then went to that BG13. And then I'll move on to the BG11, and then for the remaining part of the ice, which is a majority of it, I'm going to fill that in with the BG10. And I'm just going in between their little skates. If you go over your images, it's fine because they're already black and you're not going to be able to see it. And it's a Copic safe ink, so it's not going to smear or bleed through onto any other part of your card. But you do want to make sure that you're going in between their little skates there to make sure that you get some color down there. I was hating this. It did not look like ice. It didn't look like ice at all. So I decided to take my C1 and cover up the entire area just to kind of tone down some of that brightness that I had created with the BG markers. And my camera's a little bit wobbly. I broke my camera mount and I quickly ordered another one, like the first one that I could find just to get something, and it's not working out too well. So I am ordering another one, but in the meantime, it's going to be a little shaky, but it's the best I got right now. So I'm going to go ahead and color their skates in red just to get a little bit of color down. And I'm doing a little bit of shading because they're facing towards the left. I'm going to add some shading to the right, which is the opposite of the way I shaded them, but nobody will know the difference. And then once I had everything colored, I fixed up those little areas on the penguin too towards the right. I wasn't liking it. It was way too plain. So I'm going to trim down my panel a little bit on either side and the top just to kind of make the panel a little bit smaller. And I still did not like it. But I'm going to add my sentiment and see how I'm liking it with the sentiment to kind of break up that sky a little bit. I'm going to stamp this with my VersaFine Onyx Black ink and right there in the center towards the top, like where the sky is. And you can see that I'm thinking here because I'm still absolutely hating it. So what I ended up doing is just adding some trees in the background. Now the trees are going to look like they're coming right off the water, which they are really, but they're towards the background. So I just needed to break up that sky area a little bit. So I was debating on die cutting this. My one stitch rectangle die was not quite big enough, and being I had already trimmed down the panel, the other stitch rectangle die was too large. So I was stuck. I had no choice. So I ended up bringing in my G21 and I'm just adding basically some squiggly lines in the shape of very basic shape of some trees. And I'm just going to put them on either side of my sentiment just to kind of break up the sky a little bit. And I have not mastered the shape of a tree apparently because these don't really look like trees too much. But I started with the lightest color just to kind of map out where I wanted my trees. And then I'm going to bring in the G28 and kind of go over the same area but leave some of that G21 showing through. So I do have a little bit of shading on each one of these trees. And then I'll go back to that G21. I'm sorry, I think it's a G24, and just kind of blend that G28 out a little bit. Now, they don't, like I said, look like trees, but it did break up the background a little bit, and it's not so plain, and it does actually make this look like they are skating on ice instead of just a big blob of blue-green color. So I went ahead and adhered this down with my Tombow Mono Multi Glue to an A2 size card base, and then we will move on to the second card. Now, the second card was also a disaster, in my opinion. So, inside the card kit, there's a lot of goodies in this card kit, but this particular one comes with a few black tags, and they are very smooth, and I should have known, but I figured I could probably color with colored pencils on them. So what I'm doing is I'm taking one of the snowmen and I'm stamping this out with Unicorn White Pigment ink by Hero Arts. And this takes a while to dry. You can heat set it. I don't prefer to heat set it. I just put that aside to dry. While that is drying, I'm going to use one of the pieces of pattern paper from the kit. And this will be my background, but it has no black in it. And I wanted to add a little bit of black to the pattern paper just to kind of help tie in with the tag itself. So I'm just taking my T-square ruler. You can use any straight edge. And I'm taking a pen. This is the EK Success Journaling pen, but I'm not doing any Copic coloring, so you can use any pen that you want. I started off with the finest tip and then I moved on to the second finest tip. I have the package of 5 or 6, and I'm just drawing straight lines where those little gaps are. Once I get that done in one direction, I will flip over that piece of paper and draw those lines from the other direction as well. And it will still look like plaid. You still have the pattern of the paper, but you're just kind of adding to it. So I'm going to take the largest stitch rectangle die by Simon Says Stamp and run that through my Gemini. And this, like I said, will be my background. Then we'll move on to the coloring of this little snowman. Now I typically use my polychromos, but I brought out my Prismacolors because they tend to be a little bit more opaque, and I planned on adding shading. So I was laying out my white here, and then I'm doing some shading with the lilac color, and because I have a very small pack of the Prismacolor, so I don't have any grays. So I decided like a light purple would work. And it kind of was just moving the, I think these are made from wax, the Prismacolors, but it was kind of just moving them around. They weren't soaking into the paper, which I should have known because it is very smooth. So if you get this kit, don't try the colored pencils on this paper. It just doesn't work. And just cut a piece of black cardstock. So I decided to just go in solid with the whatever colors I was going to use for each of the images rather than trying to do any shading, because the more I was adding, the more it was kind of moving around. So I'm applying pretty heavy pressure here just to make sure I am able to cover up the entire area, and you could see every single line that I had put down. So I ended up going over the same area with little circles, colored in the entire area with little circles going right over top of what I had already colored. And that's Frankie knocking stuff down. Sorry about that if you heard that. And this just gave it a little bit of texture, like a snow texture. So I was okay with that. And I had gotten this far. I've already changed up the pattern paper and I planned on using it. So for the rest of the snow, his little face, I'm going right over his mouth and his little eyes and eyebrows there. You're still going to be able to see it, but there wasn't really much that I could do at this point. So once my coloring was done, we'll figure out how to fix that. Then for the rest of the objects here, for his little scarf, his little carrot nose, and for his hat, I was just going to go in again solid with just one single pencil, not doing any shading at all. For the main part of his hat, I'm leaving that black because I would feel that that would be black anyway, so I'm not coloring that in at all. For the scarf and the little present that he's holding, as well as the band that's around his little hat there, I'm using colors that the best I can that will match the pattern paper that we'll be using in the background. And they actually look pretty similar on the black cardstock, but it is what it is. And now once this was done, I kind of lost all of the details, some of the areas I colored over the pigment ink that I stamped with. So it was kind of hard to see what was what. It kind of just is looking like a big blob right now. So what I'm going to do is once all of my coloring is done, and you want to be 100% sure that the initial stamping is completely dry before you do this, I am going to treat this with my anti-static tool, ink up my stamp with Versamark ink, and try my best to line this up over exactly over where we stamped before. I'll sprinkle on some white embossing powder and heat set that. For the most part, it lined up pretty well. There was one little area that was off a little bit, but unless you look at it really closely, you can't really tell. But this was able to bring out the outline more, as well as his little mouth and eyebrows there. I went ahead and stamped one of the sentiments also with the Versamark ink and took an emboss it pen just to add a little wavy line on the bottom, and sprinkled that with the same white embossing powder and heat set that as well. This will just make it look like he's a little bit grounded, or there's snow at least below the little snowman. Once that was heat set, I went ahead and assembled my card. I'm going to be using a black card base, and I'm just using my bone folder there to crease that. And then I will adhere everything with my Tombow Mono Multi Glue. So I'm going to adhere my plaid panel there down flat on my card base, and then I will use the Tombow Mono Multi Glue to adhere my tag kind of at a angle there right directly on top of the pattern paper. And I'm still not happy with the way it came out. So what I ended up doing is I took a Nuvo Sparkle or Aqua Shimmer pen and went over the entire snowman, his hat, his scarf, the present, the snowman itself, and it kind of blended out the color a little bit. It is still very muted, but I didn't have those lines from the pencil that I could see in the beginning, so it did even everything out. So that is card number 2. On to card number 3, and we are going to be using some more pattern paper, and you guys know that I'm really not a pattern paper person, but these were really, really pretty, so I did want to make sure that I use them. But first, I'm going to take a scrap piece of Nina Solar White. This is 80-pound cardstock, and I'm going to stamp my snowman here. And then I'm also going to take a piece of acetate, and this is just packaging, and I'm going to stamp my snowman on that as well. Now, this is going to slide around the second you put the stamp down. So you have to kind of go up and down very quickly. If it doesn't work, if you get some smearing, just wipe it off and try again. I did have to do that the first time. Then flip over your acetate and kind of just rub that on your card panel there. Now you're not going to get a really bold black image here. So I just take my EK Success journaling pen and just directly go over those lines that from the stamp. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to completely match the other, but for the most part, once you get your coloring down, you'll never know the difference. So on to the Copic coloring. I have this sped up quite a bit because it is pretty simple coloring. Just going to be doing some shading on the snowman itself with my C1 and my C3 the same way as I did the penguins in the first card. Just adding a little bit of shading off to the left for the one and off to the right for the other, and underneath the little scarves. For their little carrot noses, or no, I'm sorry. First, we're going to go on to their hats and scarves. So I wanted one to be female and one to be male. So for this first one here, I'm going to be using some pinks, and I'm going to show you the coloring of this one. I'm not going to show you the coloring, but I will show you the color combinations for the second. Just doing a little bit of shading on the top and the bottom of the hat because this is more of a rounder object. I wanted to keep the highlight in the center. And for each one of the stripes on the scarf, I'm just doing a little bit of shading on the top and the bottom of that as well. Then I will move on to some more pinks here and fill in the remaining stripes of the hat and the scarves, as well as the little mittens. And again, just doing the shading the same way. I'm only using a 3-color combination here. These are pretty small areas. Probably get away with just 2. Now for my other snowman, like I said, I did the shading the same way. I just used blues instead of pinks. And I'll just show you the color combinations, but I colored them the same way. And I'm actually using B90 markers for all of them, or for both sets of stripes, I should say. But I just kind of switched it up as far as one being lighter and one being darker. For their little carrot noses, I am just using 2 colors here. Again, pretty small area. I'm not really concerned with too much shading there. And for the bases of their hats and their little pom-poms, I'm going to add just a little bit of shading, but this time I'm going to be using warm grays just so that it doesn't blend in with the rest of the snowman, and using that colorless blender to get rid of some of those flick lines that we have right there in the center. Once that was done, I went ahead and fussy cut these out, just leaving a very small white border around each one of the images. Just want to make sure that when you're fussy cutting something like this, you're turning your paper with whatever hand you're not actually cutting with, and pretty much keep your scissors pretty straight as you're going. Just let your other hand kind of guide the paper. So once that was done, I fixed up some of the areas where I had some smearing from the acetate with a white gel pen, and then we'll go ahead and work on assembling the card. I'm using two different papers from the pattern paper pack that comes in the kit. And first, for the snowflake one, I'm using the largest rectangle die again from Simon Says Stamp because it was on my desk and that was the easiest way to go. Ran that through my Gemini, and then I'm also going to be using some stitched circle dies as well. And I'm going to cut the largest circle from the main panel, and then I'm going to cut this other piece of pattern paper just slightly smaller than that stitch rectangle die so that will fit behind it, and I'm going to cut the smaller stitched circle die from that one. And that one doesn't matter if it's centered, but the other one you'll want to make sure that it's centered and in the position on the card where you're going to want it. So I'm just holding those down with washi tape before running that through my Gemini. Once that was done, I kind of lined everything up. I just wanted a small border underneath that main circle there. And I'm going to glue that panel on to the back of my main panel. I trimmed it down a little bit just so that it doesn't stick out from behind my main panel there. Suck that down with some Tombow Mono multi glue, and then I'm going to be using a white card base here. And I just kind of positioned this where it's going to be on the card base so that I know where to do my stamping for my sentiment. And I'm going to be using one of the sentiments from the same stamp set from the kit and stamping this with dark chocolate, I think it's called. I want to say it's dark chocolate ink by Simon Says Stamp. And I'm going to stamp that right in the center of my circle. What I thought was going to be the center, but it ended up being off just a little bit. And then I'm going to be using some Scotch foam tape to pop up my little snowmen underneath my circle and underneath my little sentiment. And that is it for card number 3. Glued that's down with Tombow Mono multi glue too. You can certainly pop this up, but when you do glue something like this down, you want to make sure that you do put glue around the circle itself, or else that's just going to continue to pop up. But that's it for the first 3 cards from the Simon Says Stamp January 2019 card kit. I will be back again tomorrow with the remaining 2 cards from this series. Thanks a lot for stopping by, guys. Have a great day.